The Leadman series generally consists of 5 races. So it starts with the marathon in the middle of June, which is like 6,500 feet of vert. Then you have in early July the Silver Rush weekend where you can do the 50 run or the 50 mountain bike. They're on the same course and they're like 7,000 feet of vert. Or you can choose to do both Saturday and Sunday. Then early August you have the 100 mountain bike, which is like 12,000 feet of vert, followed by the 10K vert, undetermined in the 10K. And then a week later you come back for the 100-mile run, which is about 18,000 feet of vert, I think. I think I wanted to do the Leadman series just because, one, I'm not a mountain bike racer. I'm pretty mediocre at best. And two, just the enormity of the challenge. So it's less about can you run a single race really fast, but more can your body handle the pounding of both training and all the different races.
So I had done the 100 run 2 years ago in 2016. And after finishing that race, I realized that you can pretty much accomplish anything you put your mind to. So the biggest, gnarliest kind of next big thing that I could think of was adding the 100-mile bike as well as the 50-mile bike to that race series and just honestly taking on something I didn't even know if I could finish.
So overall training ramped up in April. It was a little bit slower start on the weekends for me as I was still doing a lot of ski mountaineering objectives on the weekends. And so the midweek mileage came, but then as we got into May, definitely into June, we hit the big training blocks.
I would say in terms of the low points of training for me were really when the body started to fatigue to the point that you couldn't even train how you wanted to, which started making you doubt if you could actually race how you wanted to.
When I was working in Tennessee, I was just slogging out miles on the golf course at like 5:30 in the morning. Obviously there's not a ton of hills, and so there was one hill on the golf course that I literally lapped for an hour and a half to 2 hours multiple times.
The highlight of the summer and training in general was probably our trip to Jackson. So we ended up mountain biking on Teton Pass and running up the South Teton, and it was the ability to blend adventure with training, which is something that didn't always happen with the summer.
The marathon went fairly well for me. I think the challenge with the marathon was that we came in like right through training. So it's like we had put in miles all week. It wasn't like you were focused on it as a race. It was more like a training event.
Going into the race, I was probably only about 13 miles deep, and I started to feel tired, and I was like, is this training even working? I definitely didn't feel as strong as I had in the past, but as the race went on, I started to feel stronger and did finish about a half hour faster than I'd ran the race previously, so that was definitely an achievement.
The race went really well. I finished about the same time I normally did. I think I might even been 10th, 11th place.
The 50-mile mountain bike was really a test of how far training had brought me for the 100-mile mountain bike, and it was definitely difficult. So the terrain in that race is much more technical than the 100 terrain, but it definitely pushed my limits to say, I finished it comfortably, but if I was going to go into the 100 confidently, I really needed to step my game up in training.
The Silver Rush weekend, where I started on Saturday with the 50 bike, was an absolute disaster. Definitely trained too hard the week before. Within probably a mile, I knew it was going to be a miserable day on the bike, and I just melted down. Got back, finished up, took an ice bath, and tried to eat as many calories as I could to come back the next day for the 50 run. And I knew it was going to be a disaster. It was going to be really painful, but it actually turned out to go really well. It was super painful, but I ran pretty close to my fastest time on that course before. I thought it was just a bigger challenge. I mean, one of my buddies, Jason Anton, did the Leadman, and he was like, well, it's just tougher. And I love the idea of like saying you've like done all of them. And so it's just another level of challenge to take on.
100-mile mountain bike was way harder than I had anticipated, primarily from a race dynamic standpoint. So I had ridden the course in the stage race 2 weeks prior and really prepared myself for the terrain, but what I hadn't prepared myself for is what 1,500 riders on the course would do to your own personal performance. I was really behind coming into mile 60 and honestly didn't know how I was going to regain the time to finish within the 12-hour time cutoff. So at that point, I was just like, well, you have to leave everything out here on the course, pedal hard, no brakes, no stopping. God hope nothing happens to the bike. But honestly, it was just like complete focus to get through the last 40 miles of the race. With 10 miles remaining, I had basically gotten back on my time goal, which was awesome. So I knew at that point I was going to finish, and knew that I just had one final descent and just let her rip down, pedaled my ass off to get at the finish line. And it was the best feeling in the world, going from having that moment of being like, I'm done, I'm not going to finish this race, to crossing and being like, I can't believe all that effort and all that anxiety about this race is over. I finished it. So that was pretty awesome.
The 100-mile mountain bike, I didn't really know what to expect. I was a little bit nervous because it's kind of a road racer's mountain bike course. Climbed combine really well, felt good, and then from there I thought I was in a good position. I thought maybe even a shot at like 9, the big buckle, but leaving Twin Lakes, things kind of fell apart. And then the big meltdown or blow up came on power lines, where I ran out of water, started dry heaving, and any hope of a 9-hour buckle was long gone. Thankfully somebody gave me some water, and I kind of pulled it together and limped back in and finished okay. Came in a little under 10 hours, I think. I was absolutely dreading the 10K. I didn't want to get back up. I felt beat up. I was tired. And for some reason I thought, because I had a terrible performance on the bike, I should try and hammer the 10K as hard as I possibly can, which was a terrible idea, but a hard burn on my body for probably not a lot of value, considering I had to run 100 miles a week later. So I went out a little bit faster than I previously did when I ran the 100. I tried to find just a good gap in the crowd so I could still run well. And I felt pretty good for the first half marathon. And then I came into about 25, 26, and I knew it was going to be a miserable day. My quads were absolutely destroyed. It felt like just such deep fatigue. My hip flexors hurt. It was like, I just remember coming in and saying to my pacers, oh man, we're in for a big day. It's going to be pretty painful.
I would say where I started to get worried was at Outward Bound at about mile 23 and a half. At that point, I had felt like I had run 60 miles, and I was really not even a quarter of the way through the race. So I definitely knew it was going to be a long day and a long night.
The great part was it was just muscle pain and muscle fatigue. There was no joints or structural issues. And so, which is an issue I've had in the past. And so it was just how much can you handle the dull and kind of increasing pain in your muscles.
So going back up and over Hope Pass, I felt really good. We made great time climbing. But then coming back into Twin Lakes, I could feel my feet and feel the Tylenol wearing off on my blisters. So stopped, probably took about 15 minutes to retape my feet and just stuff them into my shoes. I remember at one point when my pacers, Pam, just said, just stuff it in there, whatever you have to do, even if you have to yell. And I just let out the loudest scream, stuffed my foot in the shoe, tied it up, and sucked it up.
I would say the last 40 miles went dramatically better than I could have ever imagined. It was probably the best I've ever felt in a 100-mile run. Once we got through the technical kind of rocky sections, it was just, I was ready to be done. And so whatever it took to hammer to get done, I was willing to do. And we were cruised in, still running, feeling like death, but not to the point of acute pain. So I could still run, which was awesome.
So that basically began my death march back, unfortunately, at about mile 60. Around power lines time, I had gotten sick and thrown up a few times. And then when the sun broke, I thought I would feel better around, mile 90, 93. And I really started to feel even worse. So just telling yourself that you made it this far and that this is really the last push in the entire series is what got myself through that. And thank God for my pacers who just told me to pull it together. You had 10 more miles left and finish the race.
It's an interesting time to finish in the middle of the night because there's no one there. And it's not like a big hurrah, like late in the afternoon. You just cross the line, a little quality time in the medic tent, and then I rolled out my sleeping bag and fell asleep in front of the town hall.
I would say the feeling crossing the finish line was pretty incredible. I always get choked up at the end of races, particularly because the atmosphere at the end of the race is just so encouraging and so enveloping with all this energy. And then just knowing that everything that we as a couple had worked for all summer was basically coming to a close and that it was going to be time to celebrate was just an awesome feeling.
Watching Tracy finish, I think, was the most rewarding aspect of the entire series. I think more so than my own finish. Just seeing her, knowing that it was originally just such a huge stretch goal, that she put in so much time and so much effort, like mind-boggling, more time and effort than I had put in. So for us to kind of accomplish it together was one of the most rewarding things. I was sobbing like a little schoolgirl. As I limped across the finish line, supporting her and clapping, but it was awesome. It was one of the coolest experiences, I think, of our relationship.
My advice to other married couples trying this would be to just give the other person space and understand that you're both taking on something huge. I think, in speaking about Michael and I figured our trainings and our mentalities would always be the same. If one of us was worked up about something, the other one would, or vice versa, but it doesn't work that way. I think there's so much individuality within the races, so give that person space. It may mean training alone, it may mean taking some quiet time before and after training, but I think the other piece of advice would be just to, stick together and always be that person's support, because only each other knows how hard you're working and how hard the entire series is.